Good morning everyone and welcome to this month's webinar where we're going to be taking you through the recent changes around TUPE and the potential changes that we've got coming up ahead. So as usual, we like to introduce ourselves. I'm Victoria Templeton, HR Knowledge Manager at HR Solutions, and I'm joined by Sue Watson. Sue's our Operations Director, and together we're going to take you through this topic and discuss the various questions if we get any come through. And because we have so many of you today, we've placed you all on mute. However, we do want your involvement, as always, in our webinar. And we'll do that by inviting you to ask us questions. So what you'll see on your screen now is the panel that you will have available to you to submit your question. So simply type in your question, and then we'll aim to read out as many as we can at the end of today's webinar. And another way in which we want to get you involved is through the use of polls. And you'll know when we're about to run one when you see this slide. So polls are really helpful, not only to the running of the webinar, but actually we find it helps everyone to gain an idea of what other businesses are doing or thinking on a particular topic. And they're confidential. We just know the numbers of how a question is voted upon. So, you know, feel free to participate. It would be great to have your input. So looking at our agenda today, we'll first just spend a brief moment just providing an overview of TUPE. I'll then take you through some recent changes that have been introduced and then look at the potential future changes ahead. And we're also going to then finish off with considering what changes we could see under the new Labour government. And finally, as I said a moment ago, we'll be taking your questions live. So that will be at the end of the session. So as I said, please feel free to submit your questions as we go. And before we get going, we are going to run our first few polls. So we're going to launch the first one, and it's really just to understand the organisations that you all operate within. Is it a micro, small, medium or large? So let us know the context, the size of your business. So you should see that on your screen.
Okay, I'll close that poll.
Brilliant.
Share the results. There we go.
Okay. Good distribution. So the changes that we're going to go through next around what's already occurred this year are going to be relevant to those in the micro and small size organisations, and then obviously the changes that we'll potentially see in the future, obviously relevant to all. But that's an interesting breakdown actually of the size of your organisation, so that's useful. Thank you. So the second one, again about your organisation, and it's around the employee relations, industrial relations set up in your business. So are you unionised? Do you have employee representatives or operate works council? So let us know.
Okay, I'll share those results.
Yeah. Okay.
So just not letting me share. Hang on. There we go.
There we go. So 29% of you do recognise a trade union, and 58% have employee reps, with 13% operating a formal works council. So that's interesting. Interesting about the works council actually. Probably more than what I anticipated.
Could be the larger organisations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me hide that and share the final poll.
So the final poll, yes, is more about gauging over the next 12 months, I guess, and it's around whether you think your business is going to be going through a TUPE process, and if so, how.
Okay, I'll close that poll and share those results. There we go.
Okay. Okay, interesting then. So of those that have answered yes, predominantly you'll be expecting to transfer into your business, whereas 8% transferring out, 52% no. Okay. I don't know what your thoughts, Sue, in terms of trends in like the recent years. Is TUPE becoming more of a common business?
I don't know. We're dealing with it regularly. Every day we're dealing with some client who's
Yeah,
TUPEing one way or the other. So it's definitely not quieting down. I think more so in the last 12 months, we're seeing more and more acquisitions.
yeah,
Either way, clients acquiring or clients being acquired.
yeah.
So yeah, but there is still a lot of it about. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So that's the final that poll, and then I'll move on to just going through the overview. And just as I said, before we take you through the changes, just wanted to give you a brief reminder about what TUPE is. So obviously it stands for the Transfer of Undertakings, Protection of Employment, Regulations 2006. So you can see why it's become abbreviated because it's got a very long name. And it's legislation relevant where there are business transfers, so where there is an undertaking that's situated in the UK, immediately before it's sold to a new owner, you must consider if it falls in scope of the legislation. And it applies as well to service provision changes. So if you have outsourcing and insourcing changes, these are known as service provision changes, and TUPE applies where the services remain fundamentally or essentially the same. And then it's about employees who are employed immediately prior to the transfer, transferring on their existing terms and conditions of employment with obviously their continuity of service honoured as well. And any dismissal, whether reason or principal reason is because of the transfer, it will be automatically unfair. That means you don't need your normal 2 years qualifying service to raise a claim. Of course, unless there's an economic, technical, organisational reason for the dismissal, such as there may be redundancy as a consequence. So as the legislation protects contractual terms and conditions of the employees, it's vital that you consider all terms and conditions and workplace practices, because contractual terms aren't necessarily those that are written into just the contract of employment. So if we think about, your customer practice, and that's where you have established practices that are not formally documented. It could be, for example, you operate annual bonuses, or you give extra leave days, or you always give people Christmas Eve off, for example. Those practices could become or be deemed as contractual. You may also have contractual terms through your company policies and procedures. So even though not expressly included in the contract of employment, they can form part of the employment relationship and therefore potentially transfer under TUPE. So if we think, as an example, redundancy, if you have a redundancy policy and you have been practicing offering enhanced redundancy pay, even if not contractually guaranteed, that may fall in scope and transfer under the TUPE process. And finally, if you have collective agreements in operation in your business, so any benefits that have been agreed upon through that collective bargaining, they're typically honoured. It might be, for example, shift premiums that you've got agreed and in place. So just bear in mind when you're managing a TUPE process, don't just look at what's on the paper, on the contract of employment. It's about exploring what the employment relationship is like in practice. So I mentioned that we're going to first talk about the changes that have occurred already this year, which is what we're going to look at now. So changes occurred back in July around the consultation rules, and they applied to transfers that were taking effect on or after the 1st of July. Prior to this, only micro businesses, so those employing fewer than 10 people, could consult directly with employees. They didn't need to have representation to do that consultation. They could do it directly. But of course, there was still, if they still had employee reps in place, and they had to then continue with the existing relationship and the consultation requirements. It's where they didn't have any existing representations. So for transfers taking place on or after the 1st of July, it means now the businesses can consult directly with their employees if there are no existing representatives in place when the business employs less than 50 people. So it's broadened the scope. So if you employ less than 50, it doesn't matter the size of the TUPE transfer. If you don't have any existing arrangements in place for employee representation, then you can consult directly with your employees. The other change it's expanded is because a business of any size, if they're proposing to transfer fewer than 10 employees, then where there are no existing employee representation in place, then you can consult directly with employees as well. So if we think about the future changes, back in May 2024, the previous government introduced a new public consultation. It was called Smarter Regulation, and it was introduced by the Conservative government, as I said, and it was seeking views from employers, professional bodies, trade unions and workers. The consultation is closed, and what normally happens when there's been a consultation is that the government would then analyse the responses and then provide a written response on the proposals that had been put forward and consulted on. But obviously we've now got a new government, and it's a new party that's in government, so it does remain unclear on what happens next, although we do know that the Labour government do want to reform TUPE rules too. But I'm still going to take you through the 3 proposals that formed part of the public consultation, because, you know, we could see some development still in these areas. So there were 3 proposals put forward as part of the public consultation, and one of them is the reaffirming that only employees are protected by TUPE, removing the complex obligation to split employees' contracts between multiple employers where a business is transferred to more than one new business. And the 3rd proposal was to abolish the legal frameworks for European councils. But just bear in mind, as I said a moment ago, it was opened by the previous government, so we'll just wait to see what the response is to this consultation in the coming weeks and months. I'm just going to explain each of these proposals a little bit more. And the first one is about reaffirming that only employees are protected by TUPE. And that's because back in 2019, an employment tribunal held that Limb B workers could transfer under TUPE. Up to this point, the legislation only applied to someone with the employee status. So the employment status is fundamental, as you know, when employing people, because it determines statutory entitlements and legal protections. The case, as you can see from the slide, is a Dewhurst case. And if you don't know what we mean by Limb B workers, basically they are considered in law to be a third party who undertakes to perform work personally for your business under a contract for service, and who therefore have that casual relationship with the business. So what we're meaning by that, it could be freelancers who provide regular services but who are not on your payroll. It could include agency workers, gig economy workers, casual workers. So this tribunal ruling was significant because essentially it brought into scope of the TUPE legislation that it wasn't just employees who would be included under it, but also workers, Limb B workers too. And obviously that's a massive implication for businesses. So what this proposal is effectively doing is reversing this position and bringing it back to pre-2019, where TUPE would only apply to employees. The second area of consultation is about when there's TUPE processes where there are multiple businesses involved, and that's about removing the complex obligation to split employees' contracts of employment between multiple employers where a business is transferred to more than one new business. So it's a complex legal position And this position did come about following a European Court of Justice case back in 2020. As you can see, I've quoted it on the slide here. And it is complicated. It does provide complex issues for employers, which I'll come on to sort of set out. So when managing employees, where their contract of employment is split across several employers, it is very practically challenging. For example, there needs to be that extreme care in how you undertake due diligence and planning how the business will operate moving forward when there were several employers. Managing the TUPE process itself, you need to be managing the timeline with other employers and coordinating communications, deadlines, so that you're conforming within the law. There's also the challenge of how you divide an employee's role and responsibilities amongst several employers. Or how can you require another employer, for example, to agree to how you've distributed the responsibilities and obligations across several employers? But it's also, how do you ensure smooth transition from one business to another? Or how can you protect your employee engagement and morale when you're moving and splitting the contract across many employers? So this second proposal is about making it more simple and removing the complexities by removing the ability for employees to split contracts across multiple employers. So I think that would be a positive in terms of the practical application of TUPE. And then the third aspect of consultation. So we know from the poll a moment ago, some of you do operate works councils, and this one is about abolishing the legal framework for European works councils. So just to bring some context in, when we left the EU, it meant that the UK could no longer introduce new European works councils into their organisations, but those that already had them in place were legally allowed to continue operating them. What this proposal is looking to do is to repeal that legal framework, and that allows those remaining ones to continue. So basically, those that could continue after Brexit would no longer be able to legally continue. So that is obviously going to be significant for the, I think it was 13% of you that said you operated works councils. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next in terms of the government's response to these proposals that we've got. And I guess it's quite difficult to really say what could happen under the new Labour government. What would they do? We have some indication in that the Labour government indicated in a publication called the Make Work Pay. That came out just prior to the manifesto, and it's a document that said that Labour will also strengthen the existing set of rights and protections for workers subject to TUPE processes. So whilst it's not obviously the detail, and the manifesto didn't even set out the detail, they are just committing to making sure that it's about strengthening the rights and protections for those where there's a TUPE transfer that takes place. So we do continue to keep an eye out for developments in all aspects of the new employment bill that's coming up, etc. And we will always report back through either our newsletters that you can subscribe to, our knowledge base, if you're a knowledge base member, or we post on our website and social media. So do follow us, especially if your business is likely to be subjected to TUPE in the coming months. And just to say that TUPE wasn't included in the King's speech as such, that it did detail about an employment bill, but it didn't talk about TUPE processes. And the King's speech is about setting out the government's priorities for the next parliamentary year, not the whole parliamentary term of 5 years. So it was looking at 24 to 25, which suggests that perhaps it's not high up on the government's agenda. But of course, as I said, we will continue to keep an eye on it, and we'll see how this area evolves, especially through case law as well as it comes through. And just to let you know in terms of what happens next and how you can keep in touch with us. So we are going to be setting up a Labour Hub on our main website. We'll be keeping everybody up to date through that. So there's a QR code here. So do sign up for that, and a newsletter for notifications of any updates. And then what we have coming up next month, and we should have more information because Parliament will have returned from recess. We're running a webinar on the employment landscape post the general election. So as usual, it's our free webinar. It's happening on Thursday, the 12th of September, 10 till 11. We'll be taking live questions, but we'll be focusing on the items that came out through the King's speech. So they announced in that King's speech a new employment bill. And just to clarify, there are 18 areas of change in that bill. It's significant and a very far-reaching bill. And they also introduced the concept of having the Equality, Race and Disability Bill. And that's going to focus on 2 areas of change that impacts on employment. So there really is going to be significant changes ahead when it comes to employment protections, employment rights, new legislations. So we're going to be taking a more detailed look at that on the 12th of September. So do please go onto our website or knowledge base to register for that event. So fairly quick webinar today, but just check in, see if we've had any questions, and we can see how we can perhaps help at this stage, albeit we're waiting a little bit more information from the government.
Yeah, this is a sort of general TUPE query we've had. Does TUPE apply if a UK company is acquired by a US company? The UK company will be a holding company and will still be the employer on the contracts. So I think if the overall owner is US, if there's no legal entity change and there's no TUPE.
No.
It's only if your employer changes, the legal entity that employs you, if that's the transfer,
yeah.
Isn't it? It is quite a complex one, so we'd have to kind of probably look into that a little bit more.
Yeah, probably have to look into that. Just because
but yeah, so we'll come back to you on that one, just in case there's some other implication. But potentially depends on if there's no transfer, then there's no TUPE. If they're not transferring from one legal entity to another, it's just that the owners are changing.
Yeah.
That there's most likely not going to be a TUPE, but we would need to know a bit more detail before we could be specific. So do come back to us if you want us to look into that for you.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. We're finding these days that the TUPE questions are becoming more and more quite sort of unique and specific, and they're taking a bit of research because there seems to be more and more curveballs thrown in. But yeah, it's all good stuff. Keeps us on our toes.
Yeah, keeps us busy.
We do a lot of sort of second generation TUPEs as well, which can get quite complex when you've got more parties involved and you've got contracting out services as well. So yeah. I think that's all the questions though. It looks like that's all for now. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And just a few slides. I just wanted to go through our HR knowledge base. I've mentioned it a couple of times. This is our online HR resource. It makes it easy for business owners, HR practitioners to access templates, whether template policies, letters, forms. It also provides a massive library of HR articles and guides, covers the entire employment life cycle. So if you're interested, there's a link there. It's called our HR knowledge base. We offer training courses as well, as you can see here, both ILM level 3 and 5, and many of our other courses count towards CPD. and all very practical and informative, giving you the right skills to be an effective line manager. So in terms of our webinar schedule, I've mentioned the one on the 12th. That's all about the employment landscape. I think it's going to be an interesting one given the volume of changes we can expect to see. And the October webinar is about understanding risk when managing your people. So we'll be looking at it from all aspects of the whole entire employee life cycle and the steps that you can take as a business to ultimately protect your business from risk. We're going to be looking at managing work-related functions and events in November in the lead up to the festive season. So do join us for that. That's always a popular one. And then, as usual, we're going to look at potentially the year ahead of 2025 in December. So a little bit more detail and what we can expect, not just in terms of legislation, but if there's any key case rulings we're keeping an eye on that we're due to get responses on or to be heard, and also the latest developments in HR best practices in business. So do sign up for our webinars. There's a QR code there on the screen. And then there's also a free HR white paper, and that's about several of us have come together to create. It's about strategic HR thinking, and it's how you align people and business strategy. So there's a lot of information on current trends, how we see HR moving forward, working in alignment with the organisation, developments in technology and various other things. So do check that out. It's our free download for everybody. Really informative of what we can expect to see how the HR function evolves over the future. Before we leave, there is one final poll, and it's just really to see if you'd like to find out more about our services. Do let us know and we can follow up with you after today.
Just while we're collecting those responses, just a thought was the risk management webinar in October will also be looking at the new duty on employers to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment of its employees. I think we're going to be looking at that as well as part of that overall risk management and some risk audits that we're introducing that can help you manage that as well. So look out for it upcoming. Just close that for you. There you go.
Brilliant. Thank you. And that just brings me on to say thank you to everybody for joining this shorter webinar this week. Hope you found it interesting. If there's any questions or inquiries, do follow up with us. We're always happy to help. And thank you, Sue and Hannah, for supporting in the running of the webinar today. So hope to see you next month. Have a good day, everybody.